What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Greetings and salutations. Spencer Kyte, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, here on SevereMMA's YouTube page with the first episode of One Question for Every Fight for 2023. I've been looking forward to this day since December 17th or 18th, whenever the last show was. I miss Fight Week. As much as I enjoyed this break, as much as this has been a good time, it's been some downtime. It's allowed me to watch some shows, to do some other writing, to hang out with some family, to have some good food. I like the structure, the day-to-day, the week-to-week of the UFC calendar being in effect. So I am happy to be back here. I hope you are as well. For those of you tuning in for the first time, the way this show works is, as the name implies, we will go from the top down, from the main event to the fight card opener, looking at one question that I have about every fight. Some will be playful, some will be poignant, some will be pointed. But I want to go through each fight so that we touch on every matchup, we touch on every pairing, and it gives you something to think about for each fight. Part of the reason I came up with this idea back when it was just at the Substack Keyboard Kimura, prior to becoming a video show, thanks to Harry's constant badgering and pushing and, being right and everything, was that I'm the guy who always advocates for every fight matters. And so one day I thought, if I'm sitting here advocating for every fight mattering, people got to pay attention to every fight, or not pay attention to every fight, but understand that every fight carries some value in one way, shape, or form. Then I want to deliver something each week that addresses every fight on the card. And so this series was born, migrated to video, then migrated over here when I joined the crew at the end of September, start of October. Happy to be here. We had a couple good months to close out 2022. I'm really excited for 2023. I think there are some big things on the horizon in the UFC, for SevereMMA, for me in this space. So let's get to it. Main event, a new main event. Nassourdine Imavov versus Sean Strickland. The question is, can Imavov take a big step forward? So originally supposed to be a fight with Kelvin Gastelum on Monday. It's announced that Gastelum is out of the fight because he's got a mouth injury. Posts a picture on his IG, I believe. He's had a tooth knocked out. He's also got some staph on his face, as Conor McGregor pointed out in the most Conor McGregor way possible. And so out goes Gastelum, in comes Strickland. They now fight at 205 pounds, still a 5-round fight. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is a better fight. It's a more interesting fight to me. With all due respect to Kelvin Gastelum, I think his best days are behind him. I think that fight with Israel Adesanya a couple of years ago was such a heartbreaking fight, had such an impact on KG, that I don't think we're ever going to see that version of him again. And with Imavov being one of the few under 30 emerging talents in this division, I want to see him fighting forward. The fight with Gastelum, according to the rankings, was fighting backwards. Imavov's at 12, Gastelum's at 13 or 11 and 12, something like that. And as much as people may not like Sean Strickland, may not want to see consecutive Sean Strickland main events, as we are getting here, right? He closed out 2023 against Jared Cannonier. I think this is a more meaningful fight for Imavov because Strickland has been in there with a few more recently better guys more recently. That's how we should say it. Now, obviously, Gastelum has fought for gold and has been in the title picture. Strickland has not. But I also think that coming off of that loss and facing the criticism that he's faced, Sean Strickland has had to sit with 4 weeks of criticism here for his performance in that fight, for the overall, hey, I want to kill somebody, but then he doesn't kill anybody in the cage, all of that stuff. He was real quick to raise his hand. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a more aggressive, sort of more pressuring Sean Strickland this time out. And that to me is a good thing for Imavov because I want to see him in a fight like this. I think the world of this young man. I think he has top 5 upside in this division, if not the potential one day to grow into the best version of himself and challenge for or potentially even win UFC gold. I think he's that talented, but it's all about tests. It's all about steps. So he looked good on the way up through the win over Ian Heinisch and Edmund Shabazian. The win against Joaquin Buckley last year in Paris was a good win that had some flaws, but some of that was the emotion of it. They had a real sort of heated rivalry going into that fight, and I think it got the better of Imavov at some points. But this is a fight that, came together on Monday. So there won't be any tension. There shouldn't be any animosity between the two. Sean will probably do his best to try to strike some up at some point over the course of the week, but this should be Naz at his best. And I want to see what that looks like, because I do think, as I said, that this is somebody capable of moving forward into the top 5. We're at a point with middleweight where I feel like the 3 at the top are quite established. Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker. And as always, you can sort of question Pereira, even though he's the champion, limited number of fights, whatever. Then you've got Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier. Beyond them, you've got Strickland and that group. And Imavov's right behind that group, but this is a chance to move into it. You get a win over Sean Strickland, you hand him a 3rd straight loss. You move forward into that space that maybe later on in the year, not too far down the line, you're facing Jared Cannonier. You put the 2 guys that just beat Sean Strickland together and say, duke it out, see what happens. Let's move forward. That's the kind of possible setup this is. That's how this could shake out and work out for Imavov. I think it's a good fight. I think this will tell us more about him than fighting and beating Kelvin Gastelum, as I expected him to do on Saturday. I like this matchup. I know some people won't, because it's Sean Strickland, because we just saw him fight, but it's a good fight for Imavov, and I'm really excited about it. Co-main event in the featherweight division, Dan Ige and Damon Jackson. The question is, how real is Damon Jackson's resurgence? He enters this fight on a 4-fight winning streak and is coming off a very emotional, but also a very impressive win over Pat Sabatini a few months ago. It came 4 days after the tragic passing of his brother Bradley. He adopted the nickname Action Jackson for that fight. He is carrying that moniker forward with him now as a lasting tribute to his brother. Jackson is a guy that through his regional run into his first run in the UFC was very highly regarded. LFA champ, very good grappler, really talented fighter. Struggled in his first UFC run, got put on a highlight in his first PFL fight, and came back to the UFC as sort of a short notice, just a journeyman guy that was available. And he upset Mirsad Bektic. And right away, people were like, hey, Damon Jackson. All right, I remember him. Yeah, that's a good win. That's a nice win to upset Mirsad Bektic like that. Went out in the next fight and he got lamped by Ilia Topuria. But if you are a fan of this show or you're a fan of me and watched other videos I have put together, you know I don't hold it against anybody that gets lamped by Ilia Topuria, because I think he's going to beat everybody. At some point, he's going to beat everybody and he's going to have gold. But since then, he's rattled off 4 straight wins. And that win over Sabatini is a very good win. Pat hadn't been beaten in the UFC, yet alone beaten in a hurried fashion as we got in that fight. Jackson's crafty. He's good on the ground. He knows who he is as a fighter. And so this is a step up. Dan Ige is the perfectly positioned veteran guy just inside the top 15. He's been in there with the best of them. Yes, he's lost 3 in a row, but it's to very good competition. He is the litmus test. He is the truth machine. You beat Dan Ige, it means something. It says something. It carries you forward to a certain position. And so we're going to see if Damon Jackson can do that and really bring some real attention to this run of success that he's had. If he makes this 5 and climbs into the rankings, then we're looking at some bigger fights. This is a big fight. This is a good fight, a real quality matchup between 2 veterans. But if he wins this one, then we're talking about Movsar Ivloyev. Then we're talking about Bryce Mitchell. Then maybe we're talking about Chan Sung Jung or Calvin Kattar when they're ready to return. And then we're talking about maybe Damon Jackson turning this into a climb into the top 10 or maybe even further. This can be the next chapter of a very cool story, and I want to see where it goes. Next up in the middleweight division, Punahele Soriano against Roman Kopylov. My question is, can Soriano start to find some consistency? So Puna was undefeated through his run on the regional circuit and into Dana White's Contender Series, got his contract, comes into the UFC and earns back-to-back stoppage victories, big power shots, TKOs, 2 guys, great. Everything looks good. Then he suffers 2 losses. And it doesn't look good. He's hunting for some shots at times. He's getting out grappled by Nick Maximov. Rebounded last year with a win over Dolce Mbula to get himself back in the win column, get himself moving forward. So he's 3-2 through 5 fights. And I look at Puna as a 30-year-old middleweight with some wrestling background, D3 wrestler, big power in his left hand, big power in all of his strikes, but really throws that left hand. He is a southpaw. And I just wonder, is there a version of him that we are going to see at some point that puts it all together more effectively? Because right now it's a lot of hunting for, really searching for chances to throw and land that left hand. And when it lands, it's great. But when it's the only thing you're throwing, or it's really the only thing people have to be worried about, it limits your abilities. It limits what you're going to do. And I'm sure that Eric Nixick has had these conversations with Puna. I'm sure that Dan Ige, who he's known since they were teenagers, has had these conversations with Puna and say, hey man, we gotta mix it up a little bit more. He is a charismatic dude. He's an entertaining dude. And I think there's room for him to grow in this division. It's middleweight. There's always opportunities. There's always openings. And so if he can just start stringing together 2, 3, 4 wins, that changes everything. Kopylov is coming off a really good performance against Alessio Di Chirico, but it was his first solid performance in the UFC. The 2 before that, he kind of looked disinterested. He kind of looked like a guy that was just out there. Came in against Di Chirico and looked great. So Puna's got to worry about this dude standing across from him on Saturday that's looking to show the first 2 fights weren't an accurate representation. The fight with Di Chirico was. And it's going to take more variety than just firing that left hand in order to get the job done. But if he does, there will be opportunities for him going forward. Next up, we shift to the bantamweight division. Ketlin Vieira and Raquel Pennington. My question is, does the winner get the next title shot? Does the winner face Amanda Nunes? The UFC hasn't said anything, as they often do not, because, and I understand it, they like to keep the options open. They don't like to put those things out there because injuries and all kinds of different reasons, right? Never any guarantees, card subject to change. So if you don't declare the winner gets next, then you don't have to be beholden. You don't have to be beholden to the winner getting next. That being said, the winner should get next, in my opinion. Ketlin Vieira is coming off her debated, sort of controversial, much discussed win over Holly Holm. She has been a fixture towards the top of the division for a number of years. There's been a couple stumbles. There was a year off because of an ACL injury, but overall, she is the number 1 contender that hasn't already faced Amanda Nunes. Raquel Pennington enters on a 4-fight winning streak, coming off a short notice win over Aspen Ladd. She closed out 2021, going up in weight, again on short notice against Macy Chasson and subbing her. And she's in a position here where she's got this nice 4-fight winning streak. Everything's coming together for her. I talked to her this week or last week for a story that's up on UFC.com now. And she really talked about how all the pieces of everything are coming together for her. She and Tisha Torres got married last year after being engaged for a number of years, being together for 7 years. They are pregnant. TT's with child as we speak. Congrats to them. She is enjoying some crazy cravings, as I understand it. And on a fighting side, on a professional side, Rocky talked about sort of just getting out of her own way and learning how to just change her focus to putting in the best effort and doing the best I can, and then being happy with that, win or loss, whatever it may be. And I think that makes her dangerous. I think we've seen that over the last couple of fights. And I think this is going to be a really good fight. This is going to be a competitive fight. These 2 women like to throw hands. I think we get to see the 2 of them out in the center getting after it a little bit. More like Vieira's fight against Miesha Tate than Vieira's fight against Holly Holm, who was content to just press her into the cage. Given that we haven't heard anything about a trilogy fight between Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena, because Nunes has beaten just about everybody else in the division that's in the queue. I know Irina Aldana is in there, but let's see if she can get there. She's got a fight in front of her first that she needs to get through. I just wouldn't be surprised if the winner of this gets the next opportunity and it comes somewhere towards the end of July, much like Amanda Nunes' lone fight of last year. I know Raquel Pennington has fought for the title before. It wasn't a good performance. It was an ugly fight. It also came 18 months after her previous fight and after going through some pretty horrific injuries that threatened her career. So it wasn't the best showing possible. You didn't get the best version of her, and you weren't going to on that night. If she beats Ketlin Vieira and she pushes this to 5, there's not a lot left for her. There's not a lot else for her to do other than challenge for the title. And with Vieira, it's the same thing. She extends the winning streak to 3. She halts Rocky's run of success. It should be a title shot. We close out, or I guess we open the main card in the bantamweight division with Umar Nurmagomedov and Hani Barcelos. The question is, how close to contention is cousin Umar? I think this fight is going to help clarify that. I think you could probably put Umar Nurmagomedov in a fight against a top 10 opponent today, and he might beat them. Now, the people in the top 10 vary, right? It's very different putting him in there with Sean O'Malley than it is putting him in there with Ricky Simone. But I think there are some matchups in there, and I think there's a bunch of fights in there that I wouldn't count him out at. Like, he's not one of these fighters that's in a position where I think I really would be surprised if he went out. Like, if he went out and fought Corey Sandhagen tomorrow, I think he can beat Corey Sandhagen. I think it's a good fight. I think it's a competitive fight. He can certainly lose that fight, but I also think he can win it. And this fight with Barcelos, who got back into the win column after losing to Victor Henry last year at the start of the year, is going to be that solid sort of litmus test. And yes, it's weird because Umar is ranked, Barcelos is not, so it feels like he's fighting backwards. But this is the veteran test that he needs, right? 3-0 in the UFC, beat Nate Maness last year, beat Brian Kelleher before that, beat Sergey Morozov in his debut. Those are good wins, but they're not somebody, with all due respect to those gentlemen, that is at the level of Hani Barcelos. And so let's see on Saturday what it looks like. I think we get another dominant performance from Umar. I think he's that good. He is one of my top prospects this year. He is somebody I think will be in the title picture, if not by the end of this year, then certainly by the end of next. I think he's that good. And I want to get a better understanding of it, because if you go out and you run through Hani Barcelos and you dominate this fight, that tells me something. That tells us something. He's got 2 losses in the UFC. They're both by decision. One was a majority decision at that, a super close fight with Timur Valiev. And the fight last year with Victor Henry, yes, it was 30-27, but it was a competitive fight. It's not like VW went out there and just smashed on him. It was a competitive fight. Barcelos had his moments. If Umar goes out there and pitches a shutout like he did against Nate Maness, goes out there and finishes like he did against Boom, we got to start talking about this guy as a top 10 fighter and somebody that is a real threat right now at 135, as if the division needs more real threats and more real contenders. It is the best. I love it. I cannot wait for this fight. Preliminary card closes out in the middleweight division. Abdul Razak Al Hassan versus Claudio Ribeiro. My question is, can Ribeiro be more than just the loud guy from Dana White's Contender Series? So, if you didn't watch Claudio Ribeiro on the Contender Series, he and his team set a world record, I would wager, for the most uses of, and I'm going to back away from the mic for this, hey, in a single fight. From start of walkout to the time he got into the back, I counted 9,762 of them. I'm kidding. I didn't actually count them. But in watching the fight, it seemed like the entire fight was just one big, long, continuous loop of, hey! And look, Ribeiro looked great. Went out and smashed to get his contract. Danced to the cage, walked in, smashed, danced some more. Great. Now it's time to prove some other stuff. Now you're here. Right? This is the thing that I always talk about with Contender Series. It's why I didn't include any Contender Series graduates in the Fighter to Watch series, which is up here on the website. Got its own playlist. Please check it out. This is where it starts, right? Abdul Razak Alhassan is the best opponent Claudio Ribeiro has ever faced. And you can say, well, that's not saying much because Abdul Razak Alhassan isn't that good. That's my point. These guys, for the most part, that are coming through Contender Series now, because we're so many years in, because there are a multitude of organizations, both North America and international, that are grabbing up talent, these men and women that are coming through aren't as experienced, haven't fought as good a level of competition as even some of the fighters in the first couple of seasons. And so showing out on Contender Series is one thing. It's a way to get noticed. It's a way to put your name on my radar. It's a way to get yourself into the UFC. But the real test and the real important moments come now. And so all the performative, look, I remember Claudio Ribeiro because of the performative. Now let's see if he can be more than that. Alhassan is a guy that is coming with big power in that first 5 minutes. And if you can get through it, you're probably going to get a victory because he's never won a fight that hasn't ended in the first round. And so let's see if dancing, shouting, fun-loving Claudio Ribeiro can have some success on Saturday. Hey! Brings us to the featherweight division. Mateusz Rebecki versus Nick Fiore. It's a short notice switch up of opponents. Fiore comes in on short notice. And my question is, will Fiore show more than is expected? My guy Craig Allen put out a tweet a couple days ago talking about Nick Fiore's opponent's record. And it's ugly. It's gross. His first 2 fights were against professional punching bag Jay Ellis, who had 91 and 98 career losses at the time that they fought. He hasn't fought very many opponents with a winning record. I think it's 1 in his 6 fights. He's 6-0. But here's the thing about that. As I said with Ribeiro, in terms of Alhassan being the best guy he's faced and the level of competition and the availability of opponents on the regional circuit these days being limited, that applies to Fiore as well. It also hurts him in that regard on the trying to get opportunities front that he's a member of the New England cartel. And so people look at him and automatically go, yeah, no, I don't want to fight that guy. Undefeated member of the cartel, training with Calvin Kattar, Rob Font, learning from Tyson Chartier and that crew. There's not a lot of people in the Northeast that are really lining up and signing up to face this guy. So he's fought who he can fight, and that meant Jay Ellis twice. And that meant probably a couple of short notice opponents where guys pulled out the day of or the day before, and you just put another body in there. And it sucks, and it makes them look like they're undeserving of being here, and it gives you no way to really judge these people. But what I do know from speaking to Tyson and from just generally paying attention to Nick Fiore a little bit is that he's a good grappler. And so we're going to see, right? Everybody expects Mateusz Rebecki to come out here and just run through him. And that could very well happen. That may be the case. Rebecki is legitimately a talented fighter that I think has upside and potential in the UFC. He's 30. He's experienced. He will be a good mid-pack fighter in this division, regardless of what happens on Saturday. But I just hope for Nick Fiore's sake, that he's able to show more than people expect, because I think the expectation is this guy's just some dude that's in the right place at the right time, knows the right people, and is getting an opportunity that he doesn't deserve. And I don't think that's the case. He's handled his business. He's done what has been asked of him. You as a fighter cannot control who gets put in across from you for the most part, right? Once you get to a certain level, sure, maybe. But as you're coming up, it's whoever's available, because you've got to get reps. You've got to get experience. And so, yeah, beating and facing Jay Ellis twice doesn't really tell me a ton, doesn't really show a lot. But I think of it similar to what I've said all along, or said a couple fights back about Michał Oleksiejczuk when he fought Sam Alvey, right? You can't put too much stock onto being the 6th or 7th or 8th guy to beat Sam Alvey consecutively. But you can look at the fact that he got him out of there quicker than anybody else. Those things matter. And Nick Fiore has handled his business. He's gotten everybody out of there really quickly, really efficiently. And I just want to see if he can put up some kind of a fight on Saturday and make a few people sit back and go, okay, I was wrong about this kid. Let's see more of him. Win or lose, he has a chance to gain some ground here. And I just hope he gets that opportunity. Move to the bantamweight division. Javid Basharat versus Mateusz Mundonka. And my question is, can Basharat make a statement and take a step forward? I was really surprised when this fight was announced. And I think I've talked about that before on the Fighters to Watch series, where I talked about Basharat and his brother, I believe. I think I mentioned Ferret, even though he was coming off Contender Series. But this is what happens, because Harry's in my ear about these guys being great, and Javid has been in my ear about his little brother being great as well. So I was surprised when this fight came together, because Javid Basharat beat Tony Gravely last time out for his second win in the UFC. And that, to me, is a very good win. We here at SevereMMA think very highly of Tony Gravely. And even though his record in the UFC is about 500, it's been a little inconsistent. He's fought good competition. He's lost to good competition. That was a good win. And so it's a little unexpected to me that Javid Basharat is facing a newcomer in his third opportunity in the UFC. That being said, it feels like an opportunity. Mendonca is undefeated. He is from the Shootbox Diego Lima team, which is a very good crew. Charles Oliveira, guy we'll talk about next, Alan Nascimento. Good group of fighters. Unbeaten, looked great on the Contender Series to get here, similar to Basharat a year later. But this is the chance. If Javid is as good as I believe him to be, as Harry believes him to be, and as he believes himself to be, this is where you go out and make a statement. This is where, as the 27-year-old with a little bit more experience and a little more well-rounded game, you go out and put it on the 23-year-old that's stepping up for the first time. And I want to see if he can do it, because I think skill-wise, talent-wise, Basharat has the chance to be somebody that makes some progress this year, that has some forward momentum this year. But this is where it has to start. This is where it has, like, I hate the adage that you're only as good as your last fight, but there is some truth to it. Depending how this one goes, that win over Tony Gravely fades into the background one step. And depending on what happens with Tony in his next couple fights, that changes how that one ages. And so kick off your year by going out and making a statement and getting yourself that opportunity that I believe should have came here, that he probably believes should have came here. As I mentioned, we move to the flyweight division. Alan Nascimento versus Carlos Hernandez. Question: is Nascimento the flyweight division dark horse for 2023? I think he is. I will tell you right now, I think he is. Prior to this fight, before we get to the fight with Carlos Hernandez, I think he is. He's 31 years old. He's a very good grappler. Lost his debut to Tagir Ulembekov. It was a split decision. I thought he should have won the fight. I then didn't carry that over into his matchup with Jake Hadley last year, where he did beat Jake Hadley soundly, handily at that. And Jake Hadley is still a very good prospect. We saw that in his bounce back, in his win over Carlos Candelario. And so I look at Nascimento and I think, in a division where there are a lot of younger, somewhat unproven isn't the right word, but everybody's sort of just been fighting each other and moving forward, beating the guys they should beat in a lot of instances. And I think Nascimento, as somebody that has been through it a little bit, that lost on the Contender Series when they did the all Brazil sort of setup, he lost to Raulian Paiva. That's how Paiva got his shot at the UFC. That has lost a couple of times overall in his career, but is a little bit older, a little bit craftier, knows who he is a little bit more. I think he's the kind of guy that if he can string together a couple of these victories and get out of this point of fighting the Contender Series guys, because this will be back to back, then he's somebody that can maybe be a little bit of a trap fight for some of these ranked opponents. Maybe be a little bit of a kind of like the Hadley fight. I think there's a little bit of, for myself in breaking it down, I overlooked him. I won't speak for Jake Hadley and his team in terms of whether they overlooked him or not. But I know for me as an analyst, as an observer, I overlooked and kind of undervalued Alan Nascimento going into that fight. And so I think there's the opportunity for that to happen with a few other people. Like, I'd love to see him in there with a Manel Cape, with a Brandon Royval when his wrist gets better, with somebody in that next group down, with a David Dvorak, with a Sumu Darji. Let's see if some of these younger guys can get by the veteran as well, can continue to put up wins and have success, or if the veteran can sort of use a little bit of that guile, use a little bit of that craft to get some wins and make a little run here in 2023. Shift to the featherweight division, Daniel Argueta versus Isaac Dolgarian. My question is, how is the Krause situation going to impact these Glory MMA athletes? So Isaac Dolgarian is the first fighter this year from Glory MMA that will be competing in the UFC. They, of course, are not going to have their head coach in their corner. James Krause, currently suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, pending all of the investigations and everything that's going on around the Derek Minner and Shailan Nurdembeki fight, the betting situations, all of those things. And I genuinely wonder, and I genuinely am concerned for these athletes. And Dolgarian is a perfect example. A 26-year-old making his UFC debut, undefeated thus far. He's only fought in FAC, which is James Krause's promotion in Missouri. So everything up to this point has involved his team and his coaches, and he's had them with him. And now he hits the biggest stage of the sport, the biggest fight of his career against the dangerous opponent in Daniel Argueta, and his head coach can't be there. And yes, I'm sure in the gym, at home, they have made adjustments and sorted stuff out. And if you ask them, a bunch of them will tell you, hey, we're going to be fine. We trust in whoever the next person up is, whether that's Jason High or somebody else. I'm sure they will tell you, we trust in X. When Krause has been the lead voice for that long, it's tough, especially in these spots. One of the great things about Krause as a coach when he transitioned, and even when he was kind of blending both, was that he's been through all of this stuff. And I think the fact that he wasn't a world champion really helped him in transitioning, because he dealt with losses. He dealt with things going sideways, not living up to potential, not having the best night, all of those different things, and kind of scrapping by figuring it out and learning how to use all of the tools that he had and all the weapons and all the everything, and grow into being the best version of himself as a fighter. Now he's not there to impart that stuff on guys like Dolgarian. And I'm really interested to see this year what that means for a gym that has a lot of athletes in the UFC and other places. So we'll find out starting Saturday. Shift to the flyweight division. The return of Jimmy Flick versus Charles Johnson. My question is, what does Flick look like in his debuted sophomore showing? So the Brick got a win on Dana White's Contender Series a couple years back, came right into the UFC, got a flying triangle submission on Cody Durden. Great performance of the night bonus, and then threw up the deuces and was like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm retiring. And has been inactive for the last 2 years. And yet now here he is coming back. I thought at the time, both watching him through Contender Series and watching him in that first fight against Cody Durden, that Jimmy Flick could be a interesting, dangerous, all actiony kind of addition to the flyweight division. And I think that holds true. The question is going to be, what does the 2 years do? Does it help in terms of letting everything heal up and being fresh and feeling revived and being back in love with the sport, maybe, if that's what was missing? Or is it 2 more years that you're that much older, that you've lost that much of a step? Charles Johnson is a perfect matchup here because he's somebody that is certainly good, but not too good that Jimmy Flick doesn't stand a chance. And so it's going to be interesting to see. Look, he hit the flying triangle. And I remember when we put together our top submissions for that year, I think I was the only person that voted for the flying triangle. And I threw out some, what do you mean no one else voted for a flying triangle? It's a flying triangle. We don't see them in the UFC. Yeah, there were some other important submissions in big spots. My guy can hit flying triangles. He hunts submissions all the time. You give me another action fighter in the flyweight division, I'm interested, hands down. And now we get to see this question be answered as well in terms of the sophomore showing for Jimmy Flick. Sign me up. Let's go. Last one, fight card opener, Priscilla Cachoeira versus Sijara Eubanks. My question is, how real is Cachoeira's little run here? So she's won her last 2 fights. She's won 4 of her last 5 after losing her first 3 in the UFC. The reality is I don't know. I don't know right now today. I don't know the answer to that question. It's why I'm asking the question. It's why I'm looking forward to seeing this fight, but I actually don't think this fight may tell us the actual answer, because I have that hairs on the back of my neck feeling that one or both of these ladies will miss weight, because they've been known to miss weight. They've been known to miss the flyweight mark in the past. And I don't know that beating, if Cachoeira goes out, or truthfully, regardless of the result of this, let me back this up. If Cachoeira goes out and gets run through by Sijara Eubanks, then we get that answer. Run's not real. If she goes out and dominates Sijara Eubanks, it's a little bit more real, but I still don't know the answer, because Sarge has struggled in this division and struggled overall, and she's 38 now and whatever. But it will put Priscilla Cachoeira in a position where she'll garner a step up in competition, or at least should. She's always going to be limited. There's always going to be that Jillian Robertson that comes out and is just able to put her on the canvas and dominate the way that Robertson did. But I'm curious, because we've seen the tenacity, we've seen the toughness, we've seen the ability to take some big shots, to wear them reasonably well and come back. Good gas tank, good conditioning, good tenacity. And fighters like that, sometimes it's just a matter of they need to put it together, and they need to start believing in themselves. And you start stringing together wins, and you start stringing together finishes, maybe something clicks. I don't think she's going to be, this isn't me advocating for Cachoeira becoming a top 15 fighter even. But can she continue to be an exciting, entertaining, albeit a little bit dirty at times with the eye gouging of Jillian Robertson, fighter in this division, figure in this division? Maybe. And I think we're going to find out a little more on Saturday. Those are the questions. Those are the fights for UFC Vegas 67, the first fight card of the year, back at the UFC APEX. We go to Brazil next week. I'm looking forward to this one. This feels like when I wrote my piece, one of my pieces for UFC.com this week, the fight by fight preview. I talked about there was a brief period of time where I really liked the first day of school because it meant getting to come back and see everybody that you hadn't seen. I lived in a not small town, but I lived in a suburb subdivision area where we just kind of hung out there. And so I saw whoever lived in that neighborhood, and I didn't see too many other people. We were playing rep sports, we were traveling, we were doing different stuff. And so that first day of school was cool to get back and see a bunch of people that I hadn't seen. This feels like that for me. It's been a couple of weeks. I need to get back to seeing Bruce Buffer in the cage and the referees that are going to be in there and the Apex crowd and the Apex facility itself, and hear the broadcasters and see the men and women step into the Octagon. Because it's been 3 weeks and I've watched a little bit of stuff here and there on the periphery, but the UFC is my bread and butter. It is what I pay attention to the most. And I'm looking forward to it being back. I'm happy that it's back. I'm excited that it's back. I think this is going to be a very good year. I will have a piece up later this week on OSDB Sports talking about my expectations for this year and some of the things, not necessarily that I think we'll see, but why I have that optimism. I hope you have it too. I hope this has pumped you up a little bit for the fight card on Saturday. I hope you tune in tomorrow for 10 things I like, and on Friday for the return of the picks and plays with a little bit of a new wrinkle. Check out the Patreon, SevereMMA.com/pints. It costs you $5. It is absolutely worth it. Follow all the lads on Twitter. Follow myself at Spencer Kyte. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. Know that you're loved. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.